Hi, so this week we will start telling the stories visually. And for that reason, we need to know what visual styles we want to choose for that particular story you're trying to tell. So let's look at some examples. There are different aspects of visual styles, the colors, the shapes, and they all represent the emotions connected to the story. Because emotions obviously resonate with people, and that's what storytelling is about. So the first thing you want to start with is thinking about what is the mood of your story and how do you want the audience to feel about it. And the mood can change throughout the story. It doesn't need to be the same. Your story could start maybe with some dramatic event that makes people feel worried or concerned about the character, and then things might turn out better at the end and people would feel better. But it's important to think about the emotions that you want to solicit, because if you want any action to happen, maybe you're trying to advocate for a particular case, whatever it might be, human rights, animal rights, you want to basically make your story meaningful. And to do that, you want to communicate on the emotional level. So again, the colors, the visual elements are your tools in the tool set to elicit that emotional response. So you start thinking about the mood of your story and how it might change throughout the story, how you want the audience to feel at any particular moment of your story. And you build your visual language around that. And of course, overall, you want to set up the mood for the story, not just at a particular moment, but in general. And we're going to look at some examples of the happy, uplifting, positive, and also at the other examples of the opposite moods. And we will analyze the visual elements being used. So our first examples are the famous Mr. Bean and the Joy Story, about a cute little character. And the first one is a comedy, the second one is the animated story. And they both are structured around the positive emotions. So let's take a look. And actually, before I even play those clips, let's think about the differences between them. The comedy, Mr. Bean, has contrasting colors, right? The black color contrasts with a lighter background. We also have the contrast between the reddish color and the green color, and it's edgy looking. And this other example on the right has soft colors, rounded shapes, a cute little character. And right from the start, we see the differences between those two stories. So Mr. Bean, I think most of you are familiar with this character. So the positive music, kind of funny character on the screen. And in this example, we have a different mood. Again, also positive, happy music, but softer pastel colors. So we expect something more calm, more different style. But they do have a lot in common. in spite of those differences, we have overall bright colors. And in Joy Story, we also have contrasting colors between the yellow and the blue. All right. So we have, from the same standpoint, the comedy has a funny and edgy feel, and the animated story feels cute and uplifting. And from the color standpoint, the colors in the comedy, Mr. Bean comedy, are more contrasting, and the colors in the Joy Story are soft pastel colors, so they elicit slightly somewhat different emotions. But overall, the two stories are positive. You know, they make us feel good, and the Mr. Bean uses humor, almost like a satire humor, and Joy Story is a very sweet story that you know, just has different language, but overall they're both positive feeling stories. All right. And from the shapes standpoint, Mr. Bean, because it's a satire, it's more, it's a different type of humor. We have angular shapes, versus in the Joy Story, the shapes are rounded. We can see it from this character look. It's it has like egg-shaped head, and even in the composition of this shot, we have circular shape of the boat. So all of those things, they were deliberately chosen. They're not accidental. And in Mr. Bean example, we see more angular lines, angular shapes. So different type of language. Alright, now we've looked at the positive, now let's look at the opposite. Let's look at the negative, more like sad, themes with more sad context. They're not like completely sad, because if you just make the story sad altogether, well, it's gonna be sad. There are stories like that, but think about how you can add a little bit of positivity even in the most dramatic or sad story. So you want to kind of give the audience some kind of sense of hope, because otherwise they will, you will likely turn away people emotionally. So the challenge is to find the combination of how much sad and how much happy the story should combine. So it's okay to use sadness, and if it helps to explain something, and we're gonna look at some examples. So these are examples of an awareness video about depression, and also an animated story. It's a student project. There are two different stories, and they both are structured around something sad, some sad event, some sad context that happened, but they do have a twist at the end. And so in this awareness video, it starts with the person being locked in that depressive environment, and as it progresses, we see lots of dark colors, right? Or blue, also like associated with sadness, blue, gray colors. Containing shape, lots of negative space around the character, so that area around the character that is not filled with anything but the background, for the most part, creates the feeling of isolation. But watch what happens at a certain point, because you can't just talk about sadness. Now we're seeing more brighter colors and there is like a breakthrough, right? So there is a sense of hope for the character, and the colors change, we see some splashes of light, and there is a call to action of how you can overcome the depression. Alright, so that's the first example. The second example is also starts with lots of negative space, and it's a rainy day and the child doesn't get to go outside. Notice the minimalistic shapes and minimalistic colors, and we do see blue. Blue is the only color up until the mom comes and brings a hope in the form of a yellow happy raincoat. And now the child can go and actually experience a happy day. All right, so that's another example of how the color shifts during the story. And in both examples, it starts sad. It starts with blue or like blue-gray colors in the awareness video, or neutral kind of bluish colors in the animated story, and then we see a color change. All right. Next, we're actually gonna talk about the shapes being used in those videos. So, as I mentioned, just by looking at the posters, you see that there's lots of minimalistic language and lots of negative space being used. In both examples, the negative space creates a feeling of loneliness, right? So we have a character here surrounded by the negative space, and well, there's like a little snail, right, on the wall. But for the most part, it's emptiness that surrounds that character. And also notice how the line, it actually gives a sense of hope, because it has an uplifting movement. So it starts horizontal, 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 and then it changes the direction to the right. So it kind of precedes that positive change that's going to happen in the end. And the rain is moving in the opposite direction to the line. They kind of cross, right? And the rain is basically pouring down on the character, which also creates that depressing kind of mood, right? It's pressure in the character in a sense, right, visually, and of course it corresponds to the emotional pressure that she is experiencing. So the same here, that emptiness weighs on the character. There's a small figure and lots of negative space. So when you think about your compositions for your stories, you want to consider how the character feels and how you want to communicate it to the audience. And using negative space is one way of doing that. And of course, as we talked about the colors, you've seen lots of dark colors in the awareness video associated with the depression. In the animated story, the colors are different because the character is not as severely depressed as the guy on the poster on the left, but still the character, the little girl, is not feeling happy. So the colors are lighter because there's less dramatic event, depression compared to the rainy day, or severe depression compared to the rainy day, light kind of depression, are two different things. And also the character in that animated story, she doesn't get upset for too long because mom helpfully gives her the code. So her feelings are not as dark as this one. So, but there are some similarities between those color schemes, because in both examples the colors are minimal, right? We don't see too many bright colors. So that's something that they share. Alright, so now let's look at the different stories. Let's look at a couple of romantic emotional stories. It's the same theme, but it's portrayed in two different visual languages. The first one is a happy story. It's a dancing couple that ends up happily together. And the second one, as you can see from the darker color scheme, as you might have guessed, it's also a romantic story, but something that doesn't end happily. The emotions are different in those examples. In the first one, the example on the left, the emotions are intense, and in the second one, their emotions are more minimalistic. And we can get a better sense when we actually play the sound. So it ends up with a splashing moment, and we clearly see that these two people are enjoying each other and they're at the moment. Versus in here, the story goes a little different. The music is different, there is some feeling of sadness already, there is a rain or some kind of snow effect, and the style of the drawing is also different. Notice that we have some kind of jiggling broken lines that define those characters, right? Versus in this example, the characters are so much better defined. And so, as the story goes, after they dance for some time, we're already starting to feel some kind of possibility of departure. And the music gradually fades away, they become less defined, more abstract. And they eventually separate. So we can kind of feel the end of the story through the style that is used to communicate the story. The happy story has a more realistic defined figures, versus the sad story has more abstract style. They're fading away, they're disappearing, and the lines are basically a visual tool that helps to communicate the disappearing of their relationship. So there is a difference in the mood, the intense happy mood for the characters on the left, and the poetic sad mood for the characters on the right. So the mood and color go hand in hand, as we have seen in those examples, and sometimes the color can also change as the mood changes. So far in the dance examples, the color stays the same throughout the story. It just goes with the overall theme of the story, but it can also in some examples, change, and it can help to enhance the emotional context. So we're going to look at one more example here, and that's going to be an animated story routine. And so as the story goes, it starts with the character who goes about his normal life. It's a busy Monday morning or whatever day of the week, and it basically, the schedule of this character as he moves along with his life. And at the beginning of the story, we'll see more colors, right? So we see blue, we see some presence of sunlight, and then the routine kicks in. There are still some bright colors, right? Red, happy colors in the kitchen. Green and red are contrasting colors. But as it goes, you will start noticing the color change. So I'm gonna scroll through the story and you can watch it entirely. So he goes around his life, and we already here somewhere towards the middle, we start to see less colors, right? It becomes more faded. The blues are lighter. There are no reds. There are still some warm colors, but as we move forward, the warm colors become less prominent, though they're still present. And as we keep going, now you start seeing, you see the colors here on the calendar, they're much less saturated, and we see more grays, and we have that character that accompanies the main protagonist, who represents the routine. And the character, of course, is gray, just like the story goes. The routine is gray, and we see less and less colors as it progresses. And now it feels like a black and white film, right? So you can watch that entire story yourself. I'm just gonna pause here on this last frame, and we basically see no colors. It's just grayness, and the routine has grown up from the little guy to a really big monster, right? I hope that gives you some ideas about the colors for your projects, and I just want to conclude with a few tips. So when you choose the visual style, you should choose it deliberately based on the type of story that you're trying to convey. And as the story changes, the visual style and the colors can change. The variations in colors are more common. The visual style sometimes changes, but usually it stays the same throughout the story with some variations. You might have, for example, a dream sequence where the character sees the reality different, and it's okay, for example, to use a different style in certain circumstances. But overall, as you tell the story, you want the audience to feel that it's still the same story. So you have to be very careful about the changes in visual style. However, the changes in color are much more common, and we have seen it in that routine example. And when you choose the style for your idea, you also want to be mindful of how much time you have, what are your tools available. You might want to do something big, but maybe it's just out of scope and out of budget. So there are many ways to create beautiful stories, and we have seen that little girl with just black lines, right? That was enough to communicate the concept, and it looks beautiful. So it doesn't need to be grandiose 3D animation to make the audience feel for the character, or whatever you want to convey in your story. So be creative, consider what you want the audience to do and feel at the end when you choose those elements, and well, enjoy the process.